In the harsh winter of 1875, the untamed Montana Territory holds a story that defies belief. A blind girl, betrayed by those she trusted, finds herself plunged into the icy depths of the Yellowstone River. As darkness and cold close in, hope arrives in an unexpected form, a wild mustang, untamed and free. Against all odds, this majestic creature becomes her unlikely savior, carrying her from certain death to a destiny neither could have imagined. But what drove someone to commit such a heartless act against a vulnerable child? And how did an untamed horse, known for avoiding human contact, choose to risk everything for a stranger? Could this extraordinary event be more than just chance? What powerful force could bring together two lost souls in their darkest hour? Before we dive deeper into this remarkable tale, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wooden bird felt warm beneath Sarah Mitchell's fingertips as she traced its delicate carved feathers. Even after 3 months, she could still detect the faintest scent of cedar and her father's pipe tobacco lingering in the grain. It was the last thing he had carved before the fever took him, leaving her alone with Aunt Martha in the vast emptiness of Montana Territory. "Sarah, where have you gotten to, girl?" Martha's sharp voice cut through the crisp morning air, causing Sarah to quickly tuck the bird into her apron pocket. Despite her blindness, Sarah navigated the farmhouse's worn floorboards with practiced ease. Each board had its own voice, a particular creak or groan that spoke to her, creating a map she could follow without hesitation. At 12 years old, she had mastered the geography of sound. "Coming, Aunt Martha!" She moved with surprising grace, one hand barely brushing the rough-hewn wall for reference. The smell of burnt porridge grew stronger as she approached the kitchen. "Lazy child," Martha muttered, though Sarah wasn't meant to hear it. Her aunt forever forgot how acute her other senses had become. "The chickens need feeding, and you're up here dawdling." Sarah felt the morning sunlight on her face as she passed the window. She could picture the scene outside. The frost-covered yard, the chicken coop where the hens would be waiting impatiently, the distant mountains her father had once described as purple giants sleeping under blankets of snow. "I'm sorry, Aunt." "Martha, I'll tend to them right away." "See that you do. And mind you don't spill the feed like yesterday. We can't afford waste." Sarah bit back a response. She hadn't spilled any feed. In fact, she was more careful with the precious grain than Martha herself. But there was no point in arguing. Since father's death, Martha had grown increasingly sharp, increasingly prone to finding fault. Outside, the cold bit at Sarah's cheeks as she made her way to the feed shed. The snow crunched beneath her boots in a familiar rhythm. 14 steps to the shed, turn right, 7 steps to where the feed bin waited. The wooden bird bounced gently against her leg, with each step a comfort in her pocket. "Good morning, ladies," she called softly as the chickens began to stir. They knew her voice, these birds. Unlike Martha, they never seemed to notice or care that she couldn't see them. Their soft clucking and scratching painted a picture in her mind as clear as any visual scene. As she scattered the feed, Sarah's fingers found the rough spot on the bin's edge where her father had taught her to measure the proper amount. "Not too much, not too little," he'd said. "Everything in balance, just like life itself." The memory of his voice brought tears, but she blinked them away. Crying meant questions from Martha, and questions led to accusations of ingratitude. After all, hadn't Martha taken her in when no one else would? Hadn't she given Sarah a home when she could have sent her to the orphanage in Helena? The wooden bird seemed heavier in her pocket. Father had carved it the week before he died, working even as the fever weakened him. "To remind you that even the smallest creatures can soar," he'd told her, placing it in her hands. "Don't let anyone clip your wings, my Sarah." A sudden gust of wind carried the sound of hooves. Distant, wild, free. The mustangs sometimes passed near the farm, though Martha complained they were nothing but trouble, trampling crops and breaking fences. But to Sarah, their thundering passage spoke of a liberty she could only dream of. The chickens clucked contentedly at her feet, pecking at their breakfast. In the distance, the wild horses moved on, their hoofbeats fading like a half-remembered song. Sarah stood still, absorbing the morning symphony, the whisper of wind through winter-bare branches, the creak of the old windmill, the subtle shifting of the house's timbers adjusting to the rising sun. Her world might be dark, but it was far from empty. Every sound, every texture, every scent told a story. Father had understood that. Martha never would. And somewhere out, there beyond the familiar boundaries of the farm, those wild horses ran free beneath a sky she could feel but never see. Sarah patted the wooden bird in her pocket once more before turning back toward the house. There would be more chores waiting, more sharp words from Martha, more reminders of all that had been lost. But for now, she held on to the memory of those distant hoofbeats and her father's last gift, keeping both tucked safely away where Martha could never find them. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by Mr. Peterson from the bank in town. Sarah stood in the kitchen, kneading bread dough, when she heard the distinctive clip-clop of his mare outside. The conversation that followed changed everything. "Miss Mitchell." His voice was uncomfortable, formal. "Might I have a word in private?" "The girl stays," Martha said sharply. "She's no bother." Sarah's fingers continued their rhythmic work in the dough, but her attention shifted to the rustling of paper being withdrawn from what sounded like a leather portfolio. The banker's breath caught slightly, a small tell that spoke volumes. To her trained ear, "I'm afraid there's been a development regarding your brother's estate." A pause, more paper shuffling. "This document was recently discovered among James Mitchell's effects at the bank." Martha's intake of breath was quick, almost eager. "What sort of document?" "A letter dated 3 months before his passing, explicitly stating his wish to sell the property to cover outstanding debts. There's also a provision regarding—" He hesitated. "Regarding Sarah's care." The dough felt cold beneath Sarah's hands now. She hadn't known about any debts. "I see." Martha's voice had taken on an odd tone, something between satisfaction and forced concern. "And what provision would that be?" "The letter suggests that in the event of his death, Sarah should be placed in the care of the Helena orphanage, with proceeds from the sale covering her board until majority." Sarah's hands stilled in the dough. Her father would never have written such a letter, never. "Well," Martha's skirts rustled as she moved closer to the banker. "This is certainly unexpected, though perhaps for the best. A blind child needs proper care, after all, more than a simple farmer's sister can provide." The wooden bird in Sarah's apron pocket seemed to grow heavier with each word. Through the kitchen window came a distant sound, the drumming of hooves across open ground. The wild horses were passing again, closer this time. "The bank will need to verify the authenticity, of course," Peterson continued. "But given the signature and seal, naturally." Martha's voice grew softer, meant for the banker alone, but Sarah's keen ears missed nothing. "And the matter of compensation? For these months of care?" That evening, after Martha had retired to her room, Sarah crept down to the study. The letter had been left on the desk. She had heard Martha put it there, had counted the steps from the door to the exact spot. Her fingers found the paper easily, traced over the raised seal and the signature at the bottom. Something was wrong. The texture of the paper was too smooth, too new for a letter supposedly written months ago. And the seal, she knew the feel of her father's seal, had spent hours as a child tracing its distinctive pattern. This one was different. The edges. Not quite right. A floorboard creaked behind her. "Curious little thing, aren't you?" Martha's voice held none of its usual sharpness. Instead, it carried something far more dangerous. Calculation. "Find anything interesting?" Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. "The seal is wrong," she said quietly. Father's had a chip in the corner. I used to feel it when he let me help. With his letters, a long silence followed. When Martha spoke again, all pretense had vanished from her voice. Clever girl, too clever by half, but it doesn't matter now. The bank will accept it. They're eager enough to clear the debt. And you? A step closer. You'll be well cared for at the orphanage. Better than here with a woman who never asked to be saddled with a blind burden. Father would never have sent me away. Sarah's voice was steady despite her fear. And he had no debts. I heard him tell you so the week before he died. Your father was a fool. The words exploded from Martha like bullets. Living hand to mouth on this worthless farm when he could have sold years ago. Well, I won't make the same mistake. This land will fetch a fine price from the railroad men, enough to cover what I'm owed for taking you in, with plenty left. Over. Sarah backed away slowly, her mind racing. She had to get word to someone, Mr. Peterson perhaps, or the sheriff, someone who would recognize the forged letter for what it was. Through the window came the sound of distant thunder. No, not thunder, hooves. The wild horses were still out there, running free under the stars. Something about their presence gave her courage. I won't let you do this, she said firmly. Father trusted you to care for me, to protect me. Martha's laugh was cold, empty of any warmth or familial feeling. Your father's trust died with him, girl. Remember that. Her footsteps moved toward the door. And mind you don't go spreading tales. No one takes the word of a blind child over a respectable widow's. No one. The door closed, leaving Sarah alone in the darkness she had always known. But for the first time in her life, that darkness felt threatening, filled with shadows of betrayal and greed. She clutched the wooden bird in her pocket, feeling the warmth of the carved wings against her palm. Out on the prairie, the wild horses ran on, their hoofbeats a distant promise of freedom. Sarah listened to their song and made a silent vow. She would find a way to stop Martha. Somehow, she would protect her father's legacy and herself. Snow fell thick and silent outside the farmhouse window as Sarah wound her father's pocket watch. The familiar motion brought comfort, 3.5 turns, no more, no less. She could feel each tiny click of the mechanism, a heartbeat of brass and steel that had kept time for her father through 20 years of Montana winters. The watch keeps perfect time, he'd told her once, but the truest timepiece is the sun on your face and the seasons in your bones. Now, as bitter wind rattled the frost-rimed windows, Sarah felt winter's grip tightening around the farm like a fist. The temperature had plummeted 3 days ago, and with it Martha's mood had grown darker, more unpredictable. The watch ticked steadily in Sarah's palm as she listened to her aunt's footsteps pacing the floor above. Back and forth, back and forth, like a caged animal. Every now and then Martha would stop, and Sarah could hear the distinct sound of a cork being pulled from a bottle. The mail wagon hadn't made it through in over a week. The path to town was treacherous with ice and drifting snow. But Sarah knew Martha was waiting for something. A letter, perhaps, or papers from the bank. Whatever it was, its delay was feeding her aunt's desperation. A sharp crack from outside drew Sarah's attention. One of the horses in the barn, restless in the cold. She tucked the watch into her dress pocket and made her way to the back door, counting steps automatically. 12 to the door, 3 down the ice-slick steps, then 40 careful paces to the barn. The blast of frozen air took her breath away as she stepped outside. Snow squeaked beneath her boots, and the wind carried an edge sharp enough to cut. But there was something else. A presence she felt more than heard. Something wild and watchful. Sarah paused, head tilted. There, at the edge of her awareness, the soft snort of a horse, but not from the barn. This came from the direction of the open prairie, where the mustangs roamed. Her heart quickened. They rarely came this close to the buildings. "Hello?" she whispered into the wind. A stamp of hooves answered her, closer than she'd expected. Not one of their farm horses. This one moved differently, its movements unfettered by saddle or bridle. Sarah took a step toward the sound. Then another. The mustang didn't flee. Instead, she heard it take a step closer, snow crunching beneath its hooves. A warm breath of air touched her outstretched hand, gone so quickly she might have imagined. The moment shattered at the sound of the back door slamming open. "Girl, what in God's name are you doing out here?" Martha's voice was slurred, angry. "Get inside before you freeze to death, though perhaps that would solve all our problems." The mustang's hooves thundered away at Martha's voice, but Sarah stood, rooted, her aunt's words echoing in her mind. "Before you freeze to death." The casual cruelty of the statement chilled her more than any winter wind. "I said get inside." Martha's hand clamped around Sarah's arm, fingers digging in painfully as she dragged her toward the house. The pocket watch bounced against Sarah's hip as she stumbled up the steps. Its steady ticking seemed to whisper a warning now. Time. Running out, chances slipping away like melting snow. Inside, Martha's grip didn't loosen. "What were you really doing out there, trying to run away? Planning to tell tales in town?" "The horses needed checking," Sarah said quietly. "In this cold." "Don't lie to me." Martha's voice cracked like a whip. "I saw you reaching for that." "Wild beast. Planning to steal a horse and run, were you?" "No, The slap caught Sarah across the face, shocking in its suddenness. She tasted blood where her lip had split against her teeth. "I've worked too hard, sacrificed too much," Martha hissed. "I won't let a blind brat ruin everything now." She released Sarah's arm with a shove, storming away toward her bottle and her secrets. Sarah stood still, one hand pressed to her stinging cheek, the other clutching her father's watch through the fabric of her dress. Its steady ticking counted out the seconds as tears froze on her face. Outside, the wind howled around the eaves of the house, and somewhere in the swirling snow, a wild horse called out, a sound like freedom, like hope, like warning. Sarah listened, memorizing its voice. Something told her she would need to remember it soon. The night air bit through Sarah's shawl as Martha led her along the snowy path. Something was wrong. They never went to check the river fence after dark. But Martha's grip on her arm was iron tight, brooking no argument. "Aunt Martha, please." Sarah tried again. "The temperature's dropping. We should go back." Quiet. Martha's breath reeked of whiskey. "Mr. Peterson is coming tomorrow. Papers all signed and ready. Just one loose end to tie up." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She could hear the river ahead, its usual gentle murmur transformed by winter into an ominous growl of ice and rushing water. The wooden bird and pocket watch pressed against her side. Her last connections to a father who would never have led her into darkness like this. "Stop." Martha's command came suddenly. They were close to the river now, too close. Sarah could feel the cold radiating from the water, hear ice cracking and shifting in the current. "The fence doesn't need checking, does it?" Sarah's voice was steady despite her fear. "This isn't about the fence at all." Martha's laugh was hollow, terrible. "Clever girl, always so clever." Her grip tightened painfully. "Did you really think I wouldn't find the letter you wrote to the sheriff? Hidden in your pillowcase like a child's secret?" Sarah's blood ran cold. The letter, her careful explanation of the forged document, the plans she'd overheard, everything. She'd been waiting for a chance to send it. The orphanage would have. "Been mercy," Martha spat. "A roof, meals, maybe even some kindly matron to coddle you. But you couldn't leave well enough alone, could you?" A violent shove sent Sarah stumbling forward. Her foot caught on something, a root, a stone, and she fell hard onto the frozen ground. The impact drove the air from her lungs. "The rivers, with snowmelt," Martha continued, her voice eerily calm. "Bodies get swept downstream. Sometimes they're never found at all." "Please," Sarah gasped, scrambling backward. "Father trusted you." "Your father was a fool." The words exploded. From Martha like steam from a kettle. 20 years I waited for him to sell this worthless land. 20 years watching him waste his life on a blind child while I got nothing. Sarah felt the river's edge behind her, a sudden drop where solid ground gave way to empty air. Her shawl caught on something as she tried to stand, tearing with a sound like ripping hope. "No one will question it," Martha said, closer now. "A tragic accident. The poor blind girl, wandering too close to the river at night. What else could anyone expect?" The attack came without warning, a sharp push that sent Sarah over the edge. For one eternal moment she hung suspended between earth and air. Then the darkness swallowed her whole. The shock of the icy water drove daggers into her skin. The current grabbed her immediately, pulling her under. Water filled her nose, her mouth. She kicked desperately, but which way was up? Everything was cold, dark, rushing. Her head broke surface for a moment. She gasped, choked, heard Martha's footsteps, retreating up the bank. The current dragged her down again. Can't breathe. Can't fight. Can't. Something changed in the water's song. A new sound, thunder on the bank moving fast, then a tremendous splash nearby, and suddenly there was warmth against her freezing skin. Something solid to grab, coarse hair under her fingers, a horse's mane. The mustang. It had to be. No domestic horse would have charged into a frozen river at night. Sarah's numb fingers tangled in the mane as the powerful animal fought the current. Together they battled the river's grip, horse and girl against ice and darkness and death itself. Time lost meaning. There was only the desperate struggle, the mustang's strength, the prayer that each breath wouldn't be her last. Sarah's torn shawl streamed behind them like a flag of surrender, but the horse refused to yield. Finally, incredibly, she felt the river bottom beneath her feet. The mustang half dragged, half carried her onto the bank, well downstream from where Martha had pushed her. Sarah collapsed onto the snow, coughing up river water, shaking violently. The horse stood over her, its warm breath stirring her frozen hair. Steam rose from its coat in the frigid air. Without thinking, Sarah pressed herself against its legs, seeking any warmth she could find. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. The mustang nickered softly, a sound so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. Or perhaps she was already crying. It was hard to tell with her face so numb. "I can't go back," she whispered. "She'll kill me if I go back." As if in answer, the horse carefully knelt in the snow beside her. Sarah understood. With trembling hands, she grasped the mane again, and the mustang helped her climb onto its bare back. Her shawl lay forgotten on the riverbank, torn and frozen, a last scrap of her old life left behind. As the mustang carried her away from the river's deadly song, Sarah pressed her face into its warm neck and gave herself over to whatever fate had brought this wild creature to her rescue. Behind them, the river growled its disappointment at losing its prey. Ahead lay darkness and uncertainty, but also perhaps hope. The world had shrunk to the rhythm of hoofbeats and the mustang's labored breathing. Sarah clung to its mane, her frozen fingers tangled in the coarse hair as they moved through the night. Her soaked dress had frozen solid, crackling with each movement. The blue ribbon that usually bound her hair now hung in icy tangles down her back, collecting more frost with each passing moment. She couldn't stop shaking. The cold had gone beyond pain, beyond feeling, into a numbness that frightened her. But the horse beneath her radiated warmth like a living furnace, and she pressed herself closer to its neck, seeking that life-saving heat. The mustang moved with purpose, though Sarah had lost all sense of direction. The familiar sounds of the river had faded, replaced by the whisper of wind through pine boughs. They were climbing, she realized, the ground sloping steadily upward beneath the horse's sure feet. "Where are you taking me?" she whispered through chattering teeth. The horse's ear flicked back at her voice, and it nickered softly, the same gentle sound it had made by the river. Something about that sound spoke of safety, of shelter ahead. Time blurred. Sarah drifted in and out of awareness, roused occasionally by the mustang's deliberate changes in pace or direction. Her frozen ribbon crackled against her back, small. pieces of ice breaking free to fall like tiny diamonds into the snow. Finally, the horse stopped. The wind's song had changed, bouncing off close walls instead of sweeping across open space. A cave, Sarah realized. The mustang had brought her to a cave. Clever, she managed through numb lips. So clever. The horse knelt carefully, allowing her to slide from its back. Her legs buckled immediately, but the mustang pressed close, supporting her weight against its side. Together they moved deeper into the cave, away from the bitter wind. The ground beneath her feet was dry, covered in what felt like old grass and leaves. The air held lingering warmth, as though the cave had stored the day's sunlight. Most importantly, she could hear the breathing of other horses, more of the wild herd, sheltering from the storm. Sarah's frozen ribbon caught on something as she stumbled forward, finally tearing free from her hair. She didn't try to retrieve it. Like the shawl by the river, it belonged to a life that had ended the moment Martha pushed her into the frozen water. The mustang guided her to a spot against the cave wall, where the packed grass was thickest. As she sank down, other horses moved. Closer, surrounding her with their bulk and warmth. The wild herd was accepting her, protecting her. "Thank you," she whispered again, reaching out to touch the nose of her rescuer. The horse's whiskers tickled her palm as it snuffled gently at her hand. The shaking wouldn't stop. Sarah's wet clothes were freezing to her skin, drawing out what little warmth remained in her body. She knew she needed to get them off, to somehow get dry, or the river would claim her after all. As if reading her thoughts, the mustang shifted, drawing back slightly. Then Sarah felt something being dropped in her lap, more dry grass, carefully gathered. A moment later, another mouthful was added to the pile. Understanding bloomed. The horse was bringing her nesting material, just as it would for a vulnerable foal. Sarah began pulling the frozen dress away from her skin, replacing it with layers of the dry grass. Her fingers were too numb to manage the buttons, so she simply tore the fabric where she could. The work helped, forcing blood back into her frozen limbs. Each movement brought fresh pain as circulation returned, but pain meant life. She wouldn't die, not after everything, not after her rescuer had risked so much. Gradually, wrapped in grass and surrounded by horses, Sarah began to warm. The mustang settled beside her, its body curled protectively around her makeshift nest. Other members of the herd lay down nearby, creating a wall of horseflesh between her and the cave's entrance. Safe in this unexpected sanctuary, Sarah finally allowed herself to think about what had happened. Martha's betrayal, the shocking cold of the river, the miraculous rescue. Tears came then, hot against her cold cheeks. The mustang made a soft sound and touched its nose to her face, as gentle as a mother's kiss. Sarah wrapped her arms around its neck, burying her face in its mane. She wept for all she had lost, for the death she had escaped, and for the strange new world she had entered, a world where wild things offered more kindness than her own blood. Outside, her frozen ribbon lay in the snow like a discarded piece of her past, slowly being buried by the falling snow. But here in the cave, wrapped in dry grass and horse warmth, Sarah felt the first stirrings of a new future taking shape, one hoof beat at a time. Dawn brought the scent of crushed herbs to Sarah's nose. She stirred in her nest of grass, muscles aching from the cold and struggle. The mustang had remained by her side through the night, its body heat keeping death's chill at bay. Now, something new had been dropped beside her hand, something green and aromatic. "What's this?" she murmured, fingers exploring the offering. The leaves were soft, slightly fuzzy, with a sharp, clean smell she recognized from her father's medicinal garden. Yarrow, good for fever, healing, and, she almost smiled, preventing pneumonia. The horse nickered softly, nudging more herbs toward her. Sarah's exploring fingers found others among the yarrow, mint sage, and something that might have been wild thyme. All plants known for their healing properties. "You know these help?" she asked wonderingly. The mustang's breath warmed her face in response. Of course it knew. Wild horses had their own wisdom, passed down through generations of surviving in this harsh land. Sarah chewed the herbs carefully, remembering her father's lessons about each plant's properties. The taste was bitter but strengthening, like hope itself. Around her she could hear the rest of the herd moving, some leaving the cave, while others returned. They seemed to take turns, she realized, maintaining a constant protective presence around her. The sound of hooves on stone announced another return. A new scent joined the herbs. Water, fresh and clean, carried in what felt like a piece of watertight bark. Sarah drank gratefully, marveling at the intelligence of these creatures that humans so often dismissed as simple beasts. "I need to call you something," she said to her rescuer, running her hand along its strong neck. The horses. Coat felt different from the farm horses she'd known. Rougher, thicker, built for freedom rather than comfort. "Something that fits what you are." The mustang shifted, and Sarah's hand found a patch of fur that swirled in an unusual pattern, like a storm. Or, "River," she said suddenly. "That's who you are. River who fought the river to save me." The horse pressed its nose against her shoulder in what felt like approval. Over the next hours, Sarah began to understand the complex social structure of the herd. Each horse had its own voice, its own way of moving, creating a picture in her mind as clear as any sighted person could see. River was clearly respected, though not the lead mare. That position belonged to an older horse, whose steps carried the wisdom of many winters. The herbs worked their ancient magic, fighting off the worst effects of Sarah's river ordeal. By afternoon, she could sit up without dizziness, though her body still trembled with exhaustion. River remained close, attentive to every sign of discomfort or need. Sarah's fingers found her father's wooden bird and watch, miraculously still in her dress pocket, despite everything. The watch had stopped. The river had killed its steady heartbeat, but the carved bird seemed to have survived unscathed. She held it out for River to smell. "My father made this," she explained. "He taught me that friendship can come from unexpected places." River's whiskers tickled her palm as it investigated the carving. "I don't think even he could have imagined this, though." A commotion at the cave's entrance drew her attention. The lead mare had returned with news. Sarah could tell by the way the other horses reacted. River grew tense beside her. "What is it?" As if in answer, a distant sound reached her ears. Dogs barking, men calling. The search had begun. "Martha will have raised the alarm by now," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Told everyone how I wandered. Off in the night, fell into the river. They'll be looking for a body, not a living girl." River nudged her shoulder insistently. The message was clear. They needed to move. The cave was too close to known trails, too obvious a shelter. Sarah gathered her father's mementos and the remaining herbs, tucking them safely away. Her dress was still damp but warmer now, lined with the dry grass that had saved her life. As River knelt beside her, she felt oddly unafraid. The unknown stretched ahead of her like a vast prairie, but she was no longer alone in the darkness. "Together then," she whispered, mounting carefully. River rose with gentle strength, ready to carry her to whatever sanctuary the wilderness might offer. Behind them, the healing herbs lay scattered on the cave floor, silent witnesses to the first steps of a remarkable partnership. Sarah's fingers wove carefully through River's mane, separating 3 thick strands. The morning sun warmed her back as she worked, braiding the coarse hair with practiced motions. A week had passed since her rescue, and each day brought new discoveries about her wild companions. "You move differently when you're about to change direction," she told River, who stood patiently under her attention. "Your muscles shift just slightly before you turn. Once I learned to feel it, following your lead became natural." The braid took shape beneath her fingers, not neat and precise like the ones she used to wear in her own hair, but strong and wild, like everything about her new life. She tied it off with a piece of grass, then ran her fingers over the finished work. "There, a token of trust from me to you." River shook his mane gently, careful not to dislodge the braid. The rest of the herd grazed nearby. Sarah could hear them moving through the mountain grass, their hooves creating a subtle music against the rocky ground. They had traveled far from the cave in the past week, climbing higher into the mountains where the search parties wouldn't follow. Sarah's body had grown stronger, adapting to hours of bareback riding and nights spent sheltering in whatever natural havens River could find. Most remarkably, she had learned to truly ride. Not the careful, controlled exercise she'd known on the farm's gentle horses, but something entirely different, a dance of trust and intuition. River communicated through subtle shifts of muscle and weight, through the rhythm of his breathing and the flick of his ears against her hands. "Easy now," she murmured, as River's head came up sharply. Something had caught his attention. Sarah tilted her head, listening. There, far below, the faint sound of horses, not wild ones. "Searchers?" she asked quietly. River's muscles tensed beneath her, confirming her suspicion. By now, Sarah could read his every response. A shift to the left meant danger in that direction. A ripple of shoulder muscles was a question: should we move? The slight lowering of his head gave the answer: yes, but quietly. The herd moved like smoke through the trees, their hooves finding natural paths that made little sound. Sarah laid herself low against River's neck, trusting him to guide them to safety. Her father's wooden bird and stopwatch pressed against her through the pocket of her newly dried dress, reminders of all she had left behind. They traveled until the sound of the search party faded completely. When they finally stopped to rest, Sarah slid from River's back and retrieved something from her dress pocket, a few strands of horsehair she had saved from grooming him earlier. Her fingers worked quickly, weaving the strands into a small braid of her own. When it was finished, she tied it around her wrist like a bracelet. "A token for me too," she explained to River, "to remember how you saved my life, how you're still saving it." A distant cry made them both freeze. An eagle, Sarah realized. After a moment, River relaxed beneath her hand, and she smiled. They were learning each other's fears, each other's certainties. "You know," she said thoughtfully, running her fingers over the braid in his mane, "Martha always said I was helpless, that a blind girl couldn't survive without charity and care." She straightened her shoulders. She was wrong about that. Wrong about so many things. River nudged her shoulder gently, and Sarah wrapped her arms around his strong neck. The horse's heartbeat was steady against her cheek, its rhythm as familiar now as her father's pocket watch had once been. "We should keep moving," she said finally. "Higher ground before nightfall?" River's soft nickering was all the answer she needed. As she mounted again, her fingers found both braids, the one in his mane and the one on her wrist. Together they created a circle of trust, a bond woven from survival and understanding. The herd moved out, following paths only they could see. But Sarah was learning to see through them, to read the landscape through the song of hooves on stone and the whisper of wind through grass. In this wild place, her blindness felt less like a barrier and more like a different way of knowing, one that let her understand her four-legged companions in ways few sighted people ever could. The map lay spread across Martha's kitchen table, its creased surface marked with a web of lines and notations. James Drake ran his calloused finger along the paper, tracing the paths where others had searched and failed. A blind girl survived. "That River?" His voice held equal measures of doubt and professional interest. "And you say she's been out there 2 weeks now?" Martha's fingers twisted her handkerchief. "She must have caught hold of something, been washed up somewhere. The body, she needs to be found. For proper burial, you understand." Drake said nothing, studying the map's detailed markings. 20 years of tracking had taught him to read both maps and people. This woman was lying. About what? He wasn't yet sure. "Interesting thing," he said casually, "about these marks here." He tapped a section of the map showing recent mustang sightings. Wild herds changed its pattern, moving higher, more purposeful-like, almost as if they're protecting something. Martha's breath caught slightly. Drake filed the reaction away. $500, she said quickly, plus expenses, just bring me proof. Drake folded the map carefully, tucking it into his vest pocket. I'll need to know everything, the girl's habits, her ways. Blind folk develop patterns, ways of moving. Understanding those could make the difference. As Martha spoke, Drake's trained eye caught other details. The way she avoided looking at the stairs to the second floor, the slight tremor in her hands when she mentioned the river, the carefully maintained story of a tragic accident that didn't quite ring true, but he kept his face neutral, asking the right questions, building the picture he needed. The map in his pocket would help, but the real map was forming in his mind, not just of the land, but of the situation itself. Hours later, mounted on his sturdy bay, Drake studied the wilderness before him. The moon was rising, full and bright, a hunter's moon, perfect for tracking. He drew out the map again, confirming his suspicions. The wild herd's new pattern wasn't random. They were moving in a way that shielded their back trail, using high ground and natural barriers, too clever by half for simple beasts. Now why, he murmured to himself, would a herd of mustangs suddenly start acting like they're hiding something? The answer was taking shape, though it seemed impossible. A blind girl, a miraculous survival, and a herd of wild horses acting against their nature. Something extraordinary was happening in these mountains. Drake had built his reputation on finding people who didn't want to be found. But as he studied the map's markings, the careful notes about herd movements, water sources and sheltered valleys, he felt an unfamiliar reluctance. His horse shifted beneath him, sensing his uncertainty. Drake patted its neck absently, thoughts turning to the money waiting at the end of this hunt. $500 would buy a lot of answers about Martha Mitchell's convenient story. The moon climbed higher as Drake began his methodical search. The map guided him to likely shelters, to water sources the girl might have found. But it was the signs not on the map that told the real story. Branches broken at mounting height, grass crushed by multiple hooves moving in formation, clear signs of a herd traveling with purpose. And something else. At a sheltered spring, he found traces of yarrow and other healing herbs, deliberately gathered. Not the random grazing of horses, but the careful selection of someone who knew their properties. Well now, he said softly, making a new mark on his map. Seems our blind girl knows a thing or two about survival. The trail was there, but it wasn't the trail of a victim or a lost child. This was the trail of someone choosing their path, someone with unexpected resources and even more unexpected allies. Drake looked up at the hunter's moon, then back at his map with its growing collection of marks and notes. In 20 years of tracking, he'd never followed a trail quite like this. Every instinct told him there was more to the story than Martha Mitchell was telling. The question was, what would he do when he found the truth? The map seemed to hold more questions than answers as he carefully folded it away. Tomorrow would begin the real hunt, following the signs that spoke of a remarkable partnership between a blind girl and a wild herd. Tonight, under the hunter's moon, Drake would consider which truth he was really tracking and what justice truly demanded. The leather-bound diary lay open on Sheriff Wilson's desk, its pages filled with Martha's cramped handwriting. He read the latest entry again, his weathered face growing darker with each line. June 15th, 1875. James left everything to the girl. Everything. 20 years I waited, watching him waste our parents' land on his foolish dreams. Now I'm supposed to play nursemaid to his blind brat while she inherits what should have been mine. There are ways to change such things. The banker Peterson, he understands the way of the world. For the right price, any document can be adjusted. The sheriff closed the diary with a heavy hand. He'd found it that morning, hidden beneath the floorboards while searching Martha's room. Standard procedure in a missing persons case. What he'd discovered was anything but standard. Read the rest? he asked Drake, who stood by the window. The bounty hunter nodded grimly. Every page. She's been planning this since her brother died. The forged letter, the gradual isolation of the girl, the way she spread rumors about Sarah's instability in town. He pulled out his tracking map, unfolding it on the desk. And here's where it gets interesting. His finger traced a pattern through the mountain passes. The herd's movements make sense now. They're not just wandering, they're protecting her, taking her to water, finding sheltered valleys, staying ahead of the search parties. A blind girl surviving with wild horses. The sheriff shook his head. It defies belief. So does an aunt trying to murder her niece for inheritance, Drake countered. Yet here's the proof in her own hand. He tapped the diary. Martha's last entry is most telling. The sheriff opened the diary again, finding the final entry. The handwriting was shaky, the words fueled by whiskey and desperation. The river didn't take her. Somehow she survived. The hunters saw signs. She's up there living like a wild thing with those cursed horses. I have to end this. Drake will find her, bring back proof of death. Then the land will be mine, as it always should. Have been, no one will ever know. She hired me to bring back a body, Drake said quietly. Not to find a missing girl. The sheriff's chair creaked as he leaned back. And now I know why the girl ran, why she's hiding. Drake's voice held a note of admiration. She's not just surviving up there, she's thriving. Those horses, especially the lead stallion, they're not just helping her, they've accepted her as one of their own. Through the office window came the sound of horses in the street. Martha arriving for her daily check on the search's progress. The sheriff quickly slid the diary into his desk drawer. She'll hang if the girl's found dead, he said. She must know that. Desperation makes people blind to consequences. Drake gathered up his map. Question is, what do we do now? The sheriff was silent for a long moment, fingers tracing the brass star on his chest. The law's clear on attempted murder, but proving it, he looked up at Drake. Find the girl, alive, bring her back to testify. She won't come easily, Drake warned. She has no reason to trust any of us. Then give her one. The sheriff pulled out a fresh wanted poster, turning it face down on his desk. I'm issuing this for Martha Mitchell. Attempted murder, forgery, conspiracy. By the time you find Sarah, her aunt will be in custody. My word on it. Drake nodded slowly. The girl's smart. If I can convince her the danger's past. The sound of boots on the boardwalk grew closer. Drake quickly folded his map as Martha's shadow darkened the office door. Time to choose sides, the sheriff murmured. Drake straightened his vest, where the map rested like a promise against his heart. The same heart that had been slowly changing as he followed the remarkable trail of a blind girl and her wild protectors. Already have, he said quietly, and turned to face Martha with new purpose in his eyes. The diary and the sheriff's drawer held one truth. But up in the mountains, Drake knew, an even more powerful truth was waiting to be found, one that would change. Not just Sarah's life, but the lives of everyone involved in this tale of betrayal and survival. The wool blanket slipped softly over Sarah's shoulders, its intricate patterns raised enough for her sensitive fingers to trace. The weaving felt ancient, imbued with stories she could almost understand. The horses chose well, Morning Star said, her voice as weathered as old leather. The elderly Blackfeet woman sat beside Sarah at the entrance of her isolated cabin, where River had led them that morning. They brought you to one who understands their ways. Sarah pulled the blanket closer, savoring its warmth. After nearly 3 weeks in the wild, the simple comfort of a roof and human kindness felt almost foreign. You're not afraid of them. Morning Star's laugh was gentle. The people lived alongside the free horses, long before white men came with their ropes and iron bits. We learned to listen when they had something to teach. River stood nearby, close enough for Sarah to hear his steady breathing. The rest of the herd grazed in the meadow below the cabin, their presence a soft symphony of movement and sound. You're Stallion, Morning Star continued. He carries old blood. His grandam was one of our horses, born free, but understanding the ways of humans. Some of that wisdom passes down, like the patterns in this blanket. Sarah's fingers found a raised design that felt like flowing water. He saved my life. More than once now. Morning Star was quiet for a moment. The horses know things we have forgotten. They see the truth in hearts. When they choose to help, it is never by accident. The old woman's hand covered Sarah's, guiding her fingers to different patterns in the blanket. Feel this. It tells the story of a great snow when the horses led our people to shelter. And here, the tale of a lost child, guided home by a mare who heard his mother's crying. Like River heard me, Sarah whispered. The old ones spoke of spirit horses, ones born with the power to bridge our worlds. Perhaps your river is such a one. Morning Star's voice held a smile. Or perhaps he simply saw what others missed. A heart as wild and true as his own. Sarah told her then, everything, the betrayal, the river, the weeks of learning to trust and survive. Morning Star listened without interruption, her presence as steady as the mountain itself. Your aunt's greed has blinded her more than you ever were, she said finally, but the horses have given you a new way to see. In the meadow, one of the mares nickered softly to her foal. Sarah could picture them perfectly, not with her eyes, but with her heart, the mother's gentle guidance, the foal's trusting response. I can't go back, she said, even if it were safe, and I don't belong there anymore. Morning Star's hand found her shoulder. Who says you must? The people have always known there are many ways to live, many paths to walk. Some are meant for the valley, others for the high places where only wild things dwell. The blanket's patterns seemed to shift under Sarah's fingers, telling new stories of courage and change, of finding strength in unexpected places. Stay tonight, Morning Star said. Rest. Let me share what I know of healing herbs and horse wisdom. Tomorrow is soon enough to decide your path. River's soft nose brushed Sarah's cheek, his breath warm against her skin. In that touch was acceptance, partnership, freedom. Thank you, Sarah said, and both woman and horse knew the gratitude was for them both. The blanket settled around her, shoulders like a blessing, its ancient patterns a bridge between worlds, the one she had left behind and the one she was slowly, steadily learning to call home. Morning Star rose, her moccasins silent on the cabin's wooden floor. Come, I will show you how to speak with the plants that heal, and tell you the old stories of how horses first chose to share their wisdom with those who learned to listen. Sarah stood, the blanket wrapping her in its history and hope. Behind her, River's presence was constant as a star, guiding her toward a future as vast and wild as the mountains themselves. Sheriff Wilson's badge caught the morning light as he pinned it to his vest, its silver surface reflecting more than just the sun. 20 years he'd worn this star, but never had it felt heavier than today. You understand why you're here, Mr. Peterson, he asked the banker who sat nervously across his desk. The diary lay between them, closed, but potent as a loaded gun. Surely you don't believe, Peterson began, but the sheriff's raised hand stopped him. 3 weeks ago, you presented a letter, supposedly written by James Mitchell, regarding his daughter's inheritance. The sheriff's fingers traced his badge absently, a letter that, according to Martha Mitchell's own writings, you helped forge for a price. Peterson's face went pale. Outside, the late winter sun was beginning to warm the frost-covered streets, creating tiny rivers of meltwater, like truth, the sheriff thought, always finding its way to the surface. She said it would be better for everyone, Peterson whispered. The girl blind, unable to manage the property. Martha promised, she promised you a cut of the sale. The sheriff's voice was flat. When the railroad came through buying up land, you and Martha had it all planned out. The banker seemed to shrink in his chair. What do you want from me? The sheriff stood, his badge catching the light again. The star had been his father's before him, worn with the same oath, to protect, to serve, to seek justice. The truth, Mr. Peterson. All of it. Starting with what really happened the night Sarah disappeared. As Peterson talked, the sheriff's deputy took notes. The whole ugly story spilled out. Martha's scheme, the forged documents, the whispered plans for Sarah's accident. Through it all, the badge gleamed steadily, a constant reminder of promises made and kept. When Peterson finished, the sheriff nodded to his deputy. Take him to a cell, then ride for Judge Hanson in Helena. He'll want to hear this personally. Alone in his office, the sheriff studied the wanted poster he'd prepared for Martha. Soon it would be distributed throughout the territory. But first, there was one more piece to put in place. Drake appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by the thought. Found something you should see. They rode out together, following the bounty hunter's lead. At the river's edge, Drake dismounted, pointing to marks in the muddy bank. Here's where she went in. See the signs of struggle? He moved carefully along the bank. And here, horse tracks. Different from any domestic horse I've ever tracked. The stallion that saved her. The sheriff knelt, his badge brushing against the torn earth. You're certain she survived? Drake smiled slightly. More than survived. Look there, further along the bank, clear signs showed where the herd had paused recently. And among the horse tracks, something remarkable. Human footprints, moving confidently alongside the animals. She's learned their ways, Drake said quietly. Moves with them like she was born to it, and they protect her better than any human has. The sheriff stood, brushing mud from his knees. His badge caught a glint of sun breaking through the clouds. Martha will be arrested tonight, he said. Once Peterson's testimony is recorded, but the girl, leave her be, Drake said firmly, at least for now. She's found something up there that most people search their whole lives for. Something real. The sheriff's hand rose to his badge, symbol of law, order, civilization. But looking at the tracks before him, he saw a different kind of order, a different kind of justice. Keep following them, he decided. Not to bring her back, just to make sure she's safe, that she knows, when she's ready, the truth has been found. They rode back to town as the day warmed, ice giving way to flowing water everywhere. Like the thaw breaking winter's grip, truth was breaking through lies. The sheriff's badge rode over his heart, its weight familiar but changed, reminded now that justice sometimes wore unexpected faces. In his mind, he saw Sarah and her wild companions, free in the high country. Perhaps that was its own kind of justice, better than any a silver star could provide. The wanted poster fluttered in the morning breeze, its stark black letters declaring Martha Mitchell's crimes for all to see. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store, pulled it from her window to read it again, her hands trembling with shock and anger. Wanted Martha Mitchell for attempted murder, forgery, and conspiracy, reward offered for information leading to arrest. To think, she whispered to her daughter, all those times she came in here, spinning tales about poor Sarah's unfortunate tendencies, and all along, the poster had appeared overnight on every storefront in town, each copy telling the same damning story. Martha Mitchell, respected widow and pillar of the community, exposed as a would-be murderer who had tried to kill her own niece for inheritance. Money. At the church, Reverend Mills removed his reading glasses after studying the poster. The description of Martha's crimes matched with small things he'd noticed. Sarah's unexplained bruises, her increasing silence in the weeks before her disappearance, the way she flinched at her aunt's approach during Sunday services. Lord, forgive us, he murmured. We all saw, but none of us spoke. The wanted poster made its way through town like a fire through dry grass, igniting memories and revelations. The schoolteacher remembered Sarah's quick mind and gentle way with younger children. The blacksmith recalled how she could identify any horse by the sound of its gait. The baker spoke of her unfailing courtesy and helpful nature. She wasn't helpless at all, the baker's wife said, clutching the poster. She was stronger than any of us knew, and we let that woman By noon, more details had emerged. Peterson's confession at the jail had loosened other tongues. The railroad men admitted to private meetings with Martha, planning the sale of land that wasn't hers to sell. The bank clerk spoke of suspicious documents, of Martha's increasing demands for loans. But it was the river story that hit hardest. The place where Martha had pushed Sarah in was a known killer. Deep pools, treacherous currents, water cold enough to stop a heart. That the girl had survived at all was miracle enough. That she had found safety and freedom with the wild horses seemed like divine justice. The wanted poster says she's alive up there, the livery stable owner told anyone who'd listen, living with them mustangs like some kind of spirit. My boy saw her last week, riding bareback through Miller's Pass. Said she looked more at home than any rider he'd ever seen. The sheriff let the stories spread, let the wanted poster do its work. Each person who read it became another witness to Martha's crimes, another pair of eyes watching for her attempt to flee. When Martha finally emerged from her house that afternoon, she found a town transformed. Doors closed as she passed. Former friends turned away. The weight of 100 accusing eyes pressed down on her like stones. She made it as far as the church before the sheriff's hand fell on her shoulder. The wanted poster she'd been desperately trying to ignore fluttered against the church notice board behind her. "Martha Mitchell," the sheriff said formally, "you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Sarah Mitchell, your niece and legal ward." "You can't prove anything," she hissed, but her voice held more fear than conviction. The sheriff's deputy appeared with Peterson in handcuffs. The banker wouldn't meet Martha's eyes. Another deputy carried a familiar leather-bound book, her diary with all its damning confessions. "I think we can prove quite a bit," the sheriff said quietly. As he led Martha away, the wanted poster caught a gust of wind and broke free from its pins. It rose into the air, dancing like a leaf before catching on the bare branches of an old oak tree. There it hung, black words stark against the pale sky, while far above, the faint sound of wild horses drifted down from the mountains, free, strong, and unfettered by human malice. The broken bridle hung limply from Martha's trembling hands as she stood in the mountain meadow. She had escaped during the prisoner transfer to Helena, stealing a horse and riding hard for the high country. Now, after 3 days of desperate searching, she had found what she sought. Sarah sat astride river, the wild stallion's muscles tense beneath her. The rest of the herd formed a protective circle, their hooves pawing the ground with barely contained energy. The morning sun cast long shadows across the grass, turning the scene into a living painting of freedom confronting bondage. "So, Martha's voice cracked like a whip. The blind brat survives and turns wild like an animal. Sarah's posture remained straight, regal. The weeks in the wilderness had changed her. Gone was the timid girl who had once flinched at her aunt's every word. In her place sat a young woman who had found her true strength. "I see more clearly now than ever before," Sarah said calmly. "I see you, Aunt Martha. All of you." Martha brandished the bridle, its brass fittings catching the sunlight. "Get down from that beast. We're going back to town. I'll not let you ruin everything I've worked for." "Worked for?" Sarah's laugh held no fear. "You mean schemed for, lied for, killed for, or tried to?" The herd shifted restlessly. River's muscles bunched beneath Sarah's legs, but she kept him steady with the lightest touch. The broken bridle swayed in Martha's grip. She had tried to capture River during the night, hoping to use him to control Sarah. The stallion's response had left the bridle in pieces, and Martha with a healthy respect for wild things. "You're just like your father," Martha spat, "too stubborn to know what's good for you. He could have sold this worthless land years ago. We could have been rich. Instead, he wasted his life playing farmer, doting on a blind burden of a child." Sarah's fingers found the wooden bird in her pocket, her father's last gift. Its wings felt warm, alive. "He wasn't wasting his life. He was living it, something you never learned to do." "Living?" Martha's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Is that what you call this? Running with beasts, sleeping in the dirt? You're nothing but a savage now. I'm free." Sarah's voice carried across the meadow like a song. "Free to choose my own path. Free to trust my own heart. The horses taught me that." Martha took a step forward. Several of the herd snorted warnings, but she seemed beyond hearing them. "You're coming with me. Now, before you ruin everything. The railroad men are still willing to buy. Once you're declared dead, I'm not going anywhere." Sarah's quiet certainty seemed to fill the clearing. "And neither are you." As if on cue, horses appeared on the ridgeline above, riders approaching from all directions. The sheriff's posse had followed Martha's trail. "No!" Martha's composure shattered. She lunged forward, swinging the broken bridle like a weapon. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. River reared, not in fear but in protection, his powerful form blocking Martha's attack. Sarah moved with him, as naturally as breathing, her body in perfect harmony with the horse's motion. The bridle's brass fittings flashed once in the sun, then went flying as Martha stumbled backward. The herd surged, not to attack, but to contain, forming a living wall between Martha and their chosen companion. By the time the sheriff's men reached the meadow, Martha had collapsed to her knees, all fight gone from her body. "Martha Mitchell," the sheriff's voice rang out as he dismounted. "You're under arrest." Again, Drake appeared at his side, looking at Sarah with quiet admiration. "You all right, girl?" Sarah nodded, one hand resting on River's neck. The stallion stood proud, unperturbed by the presence of domestic horses. He had protected his own, just as the herd had protected them both. "We found your diary," the sheriff told Martha as his deputies moved to restrain her. "Peterson confessed everything. It's over." Martha said nothing as they led her away. The broken bridle lay forgotten in the grass, its leather and metal a stark reminder of failed attempts to control what was meant to be free. Sarah slid from River's back, her movements confident even, on the uneven ground. The wooden bird and her father's watch were secure in her pocket, warm against her heart. She knelt and found the broken bridle, running her fingers over its shattered form. "A life constrained is no life at all," she said, softly, remembering her father's words. "The heart must run free to truly live." Drake cleared his throat. "Town's buzzing with your story. Judge Hanson wants to make sure you get your inheritance, everything that's rightfully yours." Sarah stood, letting the broken bridle fall back to earth. River's soft nose brushed her shoulder, and she smiled. "I already have everything I need." The sheriff's horse shifted nervously as the wild herd moved closer, still protecting Sarah while acknowledging the justice that had been served. "What will you do now?" Drake asked. Sarah turned her face to the sun, feeling its warmth like a blessing. "Live," she said simply. "Live and help others understand what the horses have taught me, that true freedom comes from being exactly who you were meant to be." The broken bridle lay in the grass, its shape transforming as shadows lengthened, no longer a symbol of control, but a marker of the moment when all attempts to constrain a wild spirit had finally, irrevocably failed. Judge Hanson's gavel struck with quiet authority, its sound echoing through the Helena courthouse. The official documents lay before him, their crisp pages filled with carefully worded declarations that would reshape Sarah's world. "Let the record show," he intoned, "that all property and holdings of James Mitchell are hereby restored to his daughter and rightful heir, Sarah Mitchell. Furthermore, in light of the criminal actions of Martha Mitchell, currently awaiting trial for attempted murder, the court appoints Mr. Thomas Drake as legal guardian until Miss Mitchell reaches her majority." Drake stood beside Sarah, his weathered hand steady on her shoulder. River waited outside. The wild stallion's presence had caused quite a stir in Helena, but he refused to be separated from Sarah by more than a few yards. "Your Honor," Drake spoke carefully, "there's something else we'd like to request." The judge gestured for him to continue. Sarah's fingers traced the edges of the court documents, feeling the raised seal that made them official. Sarah has a unique gift with horses, especially wild ones. She'd like to establish a sanctuary on her land, a place where mustangs can run free, protected from those who destroy their way of life. Judge Hanson leaned forward, intrigued. A sanctuary, run by a blind girl. By someone who sees with her heart, Drake corrected firmly. Someone who's learned more about horses in 3 months than most people learn in a lifetime. Sarah stood straighter, facing the judge's direction. The horses saved my life, Your Honor. They taught me that what others see as weakness can become strength. I want to protect them and help others understand what they have to teach us. The shuffle of papers filled the courtroom as the judge reviewed additional documents. You're requesting quite a large portion of land be set aside, protected, from development, including the proposed railroad. The land was my father's dream, Sarah said quietly. He believed in letting things grow wild and free. This would honor his memory better than any railroad ever could. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Several of the railroad men shifted, uncomfortably in their seats, their plans for easy profit evaporating. The law, the judge said thoughtfully, usually concerns itself with controlling things, fencing them in, making them orderly. He paused, and Sarah could hear the smile in his voice. But sometimes the wisest law is the one that protects freedom. The scratch of his pen across paper seemed to write a new future into existence. The sanctuary is approved. Let it be recorded that the Mitchell lands, extending from Crooked Creek to the high mountain meadows, are hereby designated as protected grounds for the preservation of wild horses and the natural way of life. Sarah's fingers found the words on the document he passed to her, reading them in her own way, as Drake described the official seal being added. There's more, the judge continued. Given the exceptional circumstances and Miss Mitchell's demonstrated capability, I'm granting a special provision. While Mr. Drake will remain legal guardian in matters of business until her 21st year, Sarah Mitchell is hereby granted autonomy in all decisions regarding the sanctuary and its operation, effective immediately. Outside, River nickered. As if in approval, a ripple of laughter went through the courtroom, breaking the formal atmosphere. Thank you, Your Honor, Sarah said, clutching the documents that represented not just her inheritance, but a dream taking flight. Don't thank me, the judge replied kindly. Thank those remarkable horses of yours. They seem to have better judgment than most people I know. As they left the courthouse, the morning sun warm on her face, Sarah heard River's hooves on the packed earth of the street. The stallion had drawn a crowd of onlookers, but he remained calm, waiting for her with quiet dignity. Well, Drake said, watching as she moved confidently to River's side, I'd say this calls for celebration, though I suspect you'd rather be back in the high country than at any town party. Sarah smiled, mounting River with practiced ease. The court documents were safely stored in Drake's saddlebags, but their promise felt tangible in the air around her. The herd will want to know everything's official, that their home is protected. Now, most folks would think you're crazy, saying horses could understand such things, Drake observed. Most folks would think a blind girl couldn't run a sanctuary, Sarah countered, or survive in the wild, or ride bareback on a mustang through town. River pranced slightly, as if emphasizing her point. The court documents might have secured her legal freedom, but Sarah knew her true liberation had come weeks ago, in the moment a wild horse had chosen to save a drowning girl. Together, they turned toward home, not the confined spaces of town, but the wide meadows where the herd waited, where freedom wasn't just a word on paper, but a living, breathing reality. Morningstar's fingers traced the raised lines on the deerskin map, her touch following the path Sarah had marked with carefully knotted cords and beads. Each texture told a story: smooth leather for meadows, rough knots for forests, tiny wooden beads for water sources. You've made a seeing map, the old woman observed. One that speaks to the fingers as well as the eyes. Sarah nodded, her own hands moving across the carefully crafted surface. Each herd needs its own territory, places to graze, to shelter, to raise their foals. This way I can keep track of them all. They sat on the porch of Sarah's new home, a cabin built where her father's old barn had stood. Drake had helped with the construction, but the design was all Sarah's. Wide doors to let the horses come and go, smooth floors that spoke clearly underfoot, windows placed to catch both wind and sun. See here? Sarah's fingers found a cluster of special beads. The north meadow where River's herd stays, and these marks show the trails they use most often. She moved to another section. This is where the new herd came in last week, the ones running from the cattle ranches in the valley. Morningstar made a sound of approval. You read the land like others read books. The horses chose their guardian well. In the nearby pasture, River grazed contentedly. He was still wild, they all were, but he had chosen to make this place his home. Other herds came and went as they pleased, learning quickly that within the sanctuary's boundaries they were safe from rope and rifle. Some folks in town still think I'm crazy, Sarah said, adding a new marking to the map, a blind girl running a wild horse sanctuary. But the horses don't care what I can or can't see. They care what I understand. And what do you understand? Child? Sarah's hands stilled on the map. That freedom isn't about going wherever you want. It's about choosing where you belong, she smiled. River could leave any time. They all could. But they stay because they want to, not because anything forces them. The old woman's beaded dress clinked softly as she leaned back. You've learned what many never do, that the strongest bonds are the ones we choose freely. A horse's distinctive gait approached. Drake, returning from his patrol of the sanctuary's boundaries. He had taken to his role as guardian with unexpected dedication, though both he and Sarah knew who was really in charge of the sanctuary. New herd coming in from the west, he called out as he dismounted. About 12 head, including some young ones, looked like they could use a safe haven. Sarah's fingers found the western section of her map, adding a new marker. The spring grazing there is good. River's herd can show them the way. As if in response to his name, River lifted his head and nickered. The sound carried across the property, and distant horses answered, a chorus of wild voices celebrating their freedom. Never thought I'd see anything like this, Drake admitted, joining them on the porch. Must be 30, 40 horses here now, all wild but somehow at peace. Sarah's hands moved across her map, reading the story of her sanctuary. Each texture, each carefully placed marker, represented not just locations, but possibilities. Places where wild things could remain wild, where freedom could put down roots without becoming chains. Father used to say that the best gardens are the ones you don't try to control too much, she said softly. Just give them room to grow, protect them from harm, and let them become what they're meant to be. Morningstar reached out and added her own marking to the map, a special knot that meant wisdom in her people's tradition. You've made more than a sanctuary here. You've made a place where old truths can live again. Sarah traced the new marking, adding it to her mental picture of the land she protected. Beyond the porch, hoofbeats announced the arrival of the new herd, drawn by River's call. Soon they would learn the sanctuary's rhythms, its safe places and sweet waters. They would learn that here, at least, freedom and security could exist, together. The map under her fingers was more than a guide. It was a promise to every wild heart that found its way to her land. Here you can run free. Here you can be exactly what you are. Here you will be understood. The silver bell hung silent by the cabin door, its surface etched with flowing patterns that Sarah could read with her fingertips. A gift from Morningstar. It was meant to call the horses home in times of danger, storms, wildfires, or the occasional poacher testing the sanctuary's boundaries. But Sarah had never needed to ring it. River always knew when he was needed, appearing at her door like a shadow given form, bringing whatever part of the herd was closest. Now, 6 months. After the sanctuary's founding, he stood in the early morning light while Sarah ran her hands over his powerful shoulders. "You could go, you know," she told him softly. "The spring migration is starting. The other herds are moving to the high meadows." Her fingers found the braided token still woven into his mane, weathered but strong. "You don't have to stay." River's response was to lip gently at her hair, making the silver bell chime softly. The sound carried across the sanctuary lands, where new life was bursting forth everywhere, foals finding their legs, grass growing thick and sweet, wildflowers painting the meadows with scents Sarah could almost taste. More horses coming. Drake called from his watching post on the ridge. "Looks like that band we heard about from the settler trains, the ones they couldn't break." Sarah smiled. Word had spread among both humans and horses. Here was a place where the wild could remain wild, where freedom was protected not with fences, but with understanding. The sanctuary had grown faster than anyone expected, becoming a legend among frontiersmen, and a hope for the horses they couldn't tame. The thunder of approaching hooves brought new scents and sounds. Sarah counted them by their footfalls. 8, no, 9 horses. Strong ones, proud ones, their hoofbeats speaking of defiance and hard-won freedom. River moved slightly, positioning himself between Sarah and the newcomers. Not from fear, but protocol. He was her protector, her partner, and even after 6 months, the sight of a human among horses sometimes spooked new arrivals. "It's all right," Sarah said softly. "They'll learn." Her hand found the silver bell, letting its cool surface remind her of how far they'd all come. The bell's inscription, Morning Star had told her, read, "What is free by nature must remain free by choice." The new horses approached cautiously. Sarah could smell the lingering scent of rope and saddle on them, hear the wariness in their steps. But there was something else in their movement. Hope, perhaps, or recognition of a place where they could truly belong, a soft nicker from River, and the tension eased. One by one, the new arrivals relaxed, sensing the unique nature of this place and its human guardian. Sarah heard them moving off toward the sweet grass, their footsteps growing lighter, more confident. "That's 43 now," Drake said, dismounting. Nearby, not counting the seasonal herds that passed through, there was pride in his voice. "Judge Hanson rode out yesterday while you were working with the injured bay. Says the sanctuary's becoming a model. Other territories are talking about setting up similar arrangements." Sarah leaned against River's solid warmth. "They'll need to find their own ways, their own partnerships. This," she gestured to encompass River, the sanctuary, the silver bell that represented their bond, "can't be forced or copied. It has to grow on its own." The bell chimed again in the morning. Breeze and more horses answered from distant pastures. Each herd had found its own place in the sanctuary's hierarchy, its own favorite grazing grounds and sheltered valleys. Sarah's map helped her track them all, but it was River who truly kept them unified, a leader who had chosen to bridge the worlds of wild and tame. "You're staying, aren't you?" she asked him, though she already knew the answer. "Not because you have to, but because this is where you want to be." River's breath warmed her cheek, his presence as steady as the mountains themselves. In the distance, a new foal called for its mother, and the silver bell chimed softly in harmony. Different voices sharing the same song of freedom and choice. Drake cleared his throat. "Martha's trial is next week. Judge wants to know if you'll testify." Sarah's hand found the bell's cool surface, drawing strength from its promise. "Yes," she said firmly. "It's time everyone heard the whole story about choices and trust and what freedom really means." River shifted closer, offering silent support. He had chosen to stay, to help her build something extraordinary. Now she would choose to face her past, to ensure the sanctuary's future. The silver bell caught the morning light, its chime carrying across the land where wild hearts ran free, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. 1 year to the day after her plunge into the frozen river, Sarah stood beside the new memorial stone at the sanctuary's entrance. Her fingers traced the deeply carved words that Morning Star had helped her design. Here run the free spirits of the wild, protected by those who see with their hearts, in memory of James Mitchell, who taught that true strength lies in letting things grow wild and true. The morning air carried the scents of spring, new grass, melting snow, the promise of warmth returning to the land. River stood beside her, his presence as constant as the mountains themselves. From the surrounding meadows came the sounds of the sanctuary thriving, dozens of horses moving freely, their hoofbeats a symphony of chosen freedom. "Your father would be proud," Drake said quietly. He had just returned from Helena, where Martha's sentencing had finally concluded. 20 years for attempted murder, with no chance of early release. The justice system had worked, but Sarah had found her own justice long before, in the wild places where truth ran free. "He knew all along," Sarah replied, her hand finding the wooden bird that still rode in her pocket. "About strength coming in different forms, about seeing with more than just your eyes." She smiled. "About letting wild things be wild." The sanctuary had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Over 60 permanent residents now, with seasonal herds swelling the numbers during migration. More importantly, it had become a symbol. Proof that there were better ways to interact with the wild than trying to break or control it. The memorial stone stood as testament to that truth. Carved from local granite, it would endure long after all of them were gone, marking this place as somewhere special, somewhere different. Sarah heard the approach of horses, Morning Star arriving with a group of tribal elders. They had come to conduct a blessing ceremony, honoring the sanctuary's first full year. The old woman's beads clicked softly as she dismounted. "The people say this place has strong medicine," Morning Star said, touching the memorial stone. "Not the kind that comes from herbs or ceremonies, but from understanding, from letting things be what they are meant to be." River nickered softly in agreement, and other horses answered from across the sanctuary. They were all wild, yet they chose to stay, chose to trust, chose to be part of something larger than themselves. "Martha never understood," Sarah said, thinking of her aunt in her prison cell. "She thought strength meant controlling things, owning of them. She tried to own me, just like she wanted to own this land, and instead," Drake added, "she lost everything, while you found something no one could own or control." Sarah nodded, her fingers finding the last line of the memorial's inscription. Below the main text, Morning Star had added words in her own language, their meaning known only to those who needed to know. "Here wisdom runs free, carried on hooves of trust." The sanctuary had become more than just a safe haven for wild horses. It was a place of healing, of learning, of finding strength in unexpected places. People came from all over the territory to see it. This place where a blind girl could ride like the wind, where wild horses chose to stay, where freedom and trust danced together in perfect balance. River shifted beside her, and Sarah caught the subtle signals in his muscles that meant other horses were approaching. Not just any horses. She recognized the particular rhythm of their hooves. The first herd they had saved returned from their winter grazing grounds right on schedule. "Welcome home," she whispered, and felt River's agreement in the way he moved to greet his old friends. The memorial stone stood solid beneath her hands, anchoring past to present to future. Her father's dream had grown into something even he might never have imagined. The railroad had found other routes, the land remained unspoiled, and the wild things had a place where they could remain wild. Morning Star began the blessing ceremony, her voice rising in ancient songs that needed no translation. The horses drew closer, drawn by the familiar sounds of friends and safety. Even the newest arrivals, still bearing the marks of failed attempts to break them, stood quiet and attentive. Sarah lifted her face to the spring sun, feeling its warmth like a blessing. The wooden bird and her father's watch still rode in her pocket, but they were memories now, not anchors. Her anchors were here, in River's steady presence, in the sanctuary's endless possibilities, in the memorial stone that would tell their story long after they were gone. "We did it, Father," she whispered. "We let it grow wild and true." The mountain wind carried her words away, mixing them with the sounds of horses running free, of life choosing its own path, of wild hearts finding their way home.